Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Mark Durgan. I am the project director for the Pennsylvania Care Partnership. So we are here today for our monthly collaborative call. These calls have been going on for several years now, but for this grant, which started in September of 2017, we started doing this, really started to talk about the values of system of care. And then most recently, we've been working with some of our grant partners, and by grant partners, with other SAMHSA grants, to kind of hear about what's happening in their communities. So in the last month, we heard from our Garrett Lee Smith grant, and prior to that, we had a great conversation from Luzerne County related to their trauma work and their youth-driven perspective. Today, we're honored to have Chris Minnick from the Behavioral Health Alliance of Rural Pennsylvania, and they are in their 4th year of their System of Care grant. And with that, we have Chris Minnick is going to be giving a presentation today. Everybody is on mute. I do invite you as we're going through the presentation. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions or thoughts or comments for Chris, or you can always put them in the chat box as well, and I can take a look at them. And if we need to stop during the presentation to address anything, we can always do that, or we can always hold comments and questions until the end. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Chris to start the presentation.
Thanks so much, Mark. And hi, everyone. It looks on the side here, Mark just turned it off, but it looks like I saw some familiar faces. Glad to be with you this afternoon. Talk a little bit about the BHARP System of Care grant and where we've come from and how we're kind of winding down and some of those strategies. So we'll move along here. A bit of an agenda. So we'll talk a little bit about the components of the grant and then end with some discussion around sustainability and some lessons learned. First, you probably want to know, some of you, what BHARP is, and Mark explained what it stood for, but we are the Behavioral Health Alliance of Rural Pennsylvania. Interestingly, our original line of business and our primary line of business is to support the implementation of the Health Choices Project in 23 rural counties, and I'll bring that map back here in a little bit that you saw on the first slide. But one of our counties, Columbia, Montour, Snyder, Union County, and I think I saw a representative from that county on the call here, agreed to apply for a System of Care grant on behalf of the 23 counties. And we were successful in getting that. And in 2015, we heard that we were awarded that grant and began in September on the 29th of 2015, the 30th of 2015, implementing that grant. We were very appreciative of all the support that we received from lots of partners around the state in applying for the grants and putting that together. Took the state priorities that were identified, thought they were absolutely very valid. We boiled those down into 4 that we, as a group, agreed that were our top priorities to implement. A youth-driven system of care, a family-driven system of care, a trauma-informed system of care as part of our practice improvement, and then insisting that each of the county partners develop their own system of care leadership teams. And I'll talk to you here in a moment. Maybe I'll just go ahead and talk about that now. Discussion about how we designated the county. So the map here, as you'll see, is includes green and gold identifiers for the 23 BHARP counties. And that's why the presentation is entitled a 15,000 square mile view, because that's the catchment and coverage area of BHARP. So we're putting lots of miles on our vehicles, traveling around to all the counties and trying to provide some support. Of course, we do a lot of it remotely. So in the very beginning, before we even applied for the grant, and this has been a blessing, and I talk about this blessing every time we talk about our project, these counties all signed on. When we came together as a BHARP collaborative for as I said, the implementation of the Health Choices Medicaid Managed Care product, this group decided or didn't to go for the grant. And in that process, 8 of the counties, which are identified in gold here, were known as Tier 1 counties. And the remaining counties, the green ones here, are the 15 remaining of the 23 that are what are known as Tier 2 counties. The Tier 1 counties participate at the highest level, as this slide suggests, and they each receive what I believe a pretty substantial allocation. They get $50,000 a year, and that has increased to $60,000 in the final year to do local activities related to those 4 core concepts that I just spoke about. The Tier 2 counties have had access to what we call mini grants. They've ranged from about $4,000 to $8,000, depending on funding availability each year. And that is a non-competitive process. We set that money aside. If they wish to have access to that, they apply. They also are required to focus on the core activities of the grant as they're considering what they would like to use those mini grants for. Part of the additional requirements of the counties, and I will say, and I'm going to try and say this several times, but I might as well start early and say it. The short story of our grant is the magic happens at the counties. BHARP, we consider ourselves to be farmers. We plant seeds. We try and create resource and availability for the counties, but the counties take that resource, apply it locally based on their strengths and what they have available to them and their relationships. And so we really try to put minimal restraint on them and constraints and requirements to allow them the maximum amount of flexibility. So in their counties, we ask that they have at least 25% family and youth representation each on their leadership teams that we talked about here a little while ago. These would include stakeholders from behavioral health, substance abuse, juvenile justice, child welfare, education, community partners, community action agencies, United Ways, wherever they might find their relationships that they would like to build. As I suggested, they were charged with developing their local strategies to focus on the core activities. In terms of our governance, we have a couple layers. One is the BHARP leadership team that meets, and again, keep in mind the magic happens in the counties. We do not want to overwhelm them with a bunch of bureaucracy. So they only met really twice a year, the BHARP leadership team. Every 6 months they meet to provide overarching guidance, discussion, review the budget, create some priorities based on their local focus as well. That BHARP leadership team is made up of the Tier 1 county project directors. We have project directors in each of those counties and or programs, and a youth and a family member from each of the counties. So we intentionally overloaded that group with youth and family and local leadership coming to the table. There's very few BHARP staff. I'm the project director. We have a social marketer. We have our partners from the University of Pittsburgh that help us with evaluation, and an individual that we have under contract to support cultural and linguistic competency and the disparities impact statement goals. Very few at the BHARP level in terms of staff. The operations team meets monthly, and that was intentionally developed to include our managed care partner. Keeping in mind we're tied, BHARP is tied to the Medicaid managed care product. So we have a representation on the operations team from the Medicaid managed care provider, some counties, the aforementioned staff, consultants that I just mentioned, and SAMHSA has always been a part of those calls. We had probably 2 calls before we were able to be organized enough in 2015 to begin inviting SAMHSA. Intention, and I'm sure many of you who are project directors and are working on your grants will attest, it's best to talk things through with our partners at SAMHSA and the consultants, which we've tried to do, as I've said a couple times now, from the beginning, so that there's no surprises. They know where we're headed. If there's some question about where we might be going, and we'll talk about a couple of those options here in a little bit. We wanted them to be part of our operations team. So that meets monthly. We actually just met today with those folks. We decided that this was crafted November 10th, 2015. This was like I believe our first meeting of the counties. So we tried to hit the ground running back then. It's hard to believe that's almost 4 years ago now, but at that meeting, we talked about what system of care priorities meant to each of those stakeholders that attended that day. And this is the word cloud that they came up with. We decided not to be wordsmiths. We decided not to print this on every single sheet of paper that we send out. It's certainly not a customary thing, usually like your mission statement, a little bit more visible, but we decided we wanted to be focused, and this is what we put together, and this is what we've hung our hat on since the beginning. So I'm understanding, and I don't know if you folks are on, if you can mute yourselves from the University of Pittsburgh. Are Monica and Sam on the call? I know I talked to them this morning, they were going to be on. Are you folks on? Mark might have to unmute them if he finds them to be on. So I just want to welcome them to offer any comments. My screen is what you see. I don't see any of the panel along the side to see who might be talking or chatting. So somebody will have to throw something my way if they want me to stop.
I unmuted Monica and Sam if they are there and have the speaker ready. If not,
awesome.
We will follow back with them. Oh.
I'm here.
Well,
yeah, I was trying to talk. Hi.
So I can talk a little bit about this, and then we can, I just would love for them to offer some comments, if you will, particularly when we get into some of the slides that show the dashboard. So,
yep, I think Monica's here and ready.
Excellent, excellent. So you can see here, our partnership is with the University of Pittsburgh, specifically Youth and Family Training Institute. We agreed at the very beginning when we created the grant that we were going to go 0 to 21 because so much of our work around trauma specifically was we didn't want to restrict that. Not that we were going to see 1-year-olds, but we might see 3-year-olds. And I believe the data showed we saw some 4-year-olds that were part of our collection. So the counties were required, and this was part of what signing on for their $50,000. That's where all the information came from in terms of fulfilling the data requirements. And as I mentioned, and it says here at the bottom, the data collected is then processed and transformed into real-time data dashboards by YFTI. And here they are. And if I'll hack through a little bit of this, and then if Monica and Sam, if you want to add anything. So this is what our main menu looks like. It's custom, and for those of you that also partner with the University of Pittsburgh, they do a fantastic job at putting some custom twists on your systems to be able to get out what's most helpful to you. You can see they have our emblems on there and our color schemes. So each of the 7 submenus is clickable and contains several dashboards within a specific category, such as enrollment, mental health, and outcomes. Here's the enrollment. The enrollment dashboard provides a snapshot of the system involvement, referral sources. The map and parameters on the left-hand side allow users to filter by their individual county, as well as demographic information shared by gender and age group. So it's pretty cool when you start to dice this up. I'll be the first to admit, and Monica, you probably can see how often we're on and we're not. I would love to have just had lots more time in our 3 3/4 years now that we've been at this to play with this dashboard, way more than what I really took the opportunity to do. But it's really interesting when you start to slice this up by age and ethnicity and so on, what you really have here. So the demographic parameters are, yeah, go ahead, Monica, please. Do you want me to go back?
No, I was just going to say Chris is also being a little humble, as always, but you were doing, for quite some time, kind of regular emails sort of highlighting one of the charts and, drawing attention to and providing additional resources around, specific things that you saw. So I thought that was a fantastic way to use the dashboards, and so just wanted to give you a little credit as well.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, as the grant has moved along, we've continued to transfer more ownership to the counties and become less of an overarching presence. And what Monica says is about the extent of my expertise is to use the snipping tool in Windows. So I could snip out one of these charts and just make some observations, you know, and I tried to challenge the system in some ways too, in thinking when you looked at some of our data. I mean, we ended, I'm proud to say, with accomplishing all of our goals already for enrollment at 440. As I said to the counties, we crushed it because we were at 441. we overdid ourselves. We were just so overachievers. We landed on 441. So we're pleased to say that that was an accomplishment. But the data, of course, has gotten more rich as that has grown. A little bit now about youth and family-driven system of care. So as the slide says, we really pride ourselves on this decentralized approach. It was from the beginning, as our friends from SAMHSA said, you know, the SAMHSA grants are like venture capital. Our consultant, Diana, who may or may not be on here, I think she had planned to join us this afternoon. So, you know, part of our experiment in our venture here was to really try and grow roots in the counties, support them in a way that they needed, provide technical assistance to the project directors, allow that to take root, and then slowly move towards really independence in those counties as a part of our overarching sustainability plan. Thinking that, you know, someone sitting in State College at the BHARP office is not going to be have the power to root this permanently in folk systems. That could only be done locally. So in the beginning, for youth and family-driven system of care, we had a contract with an existing youth and family organization to provide some technical assistance. Quite honestly, I think they would agree, and in speaking with them, I know they would agree that that was kind of already pointing towards that not the best way to go about it, because, you know, they were rooted locally, and people really need to learn the local communities in order to succeed, and they did not have the opportunity to do that as much as they wanted to. So in the second middle part, we'll say the middle part of the grant, BHARP continued to contract for that, but we contracted with local people in the local county regions to provide consultation to youth and family organizations, individuals, development in those counties. That went a little better. I think they would agree with that as well, particularly in the counties, you know, basically where the people were from, the consultants that we used were from. These were grassroots or families. These were folks that were involved in the system, identified by the project directors or in the county system, or people known to us is who we contracted with. And then finally, in our last 18 months of this contracted grant cycle, we transferred additional dollars. That's why I said at the beginning that each of the counties had $50,000 in the beginning. They're now at $60,000. We gave them an extra $10,000 a year to provide wages under contract with youth and family consultants locally. And we left that very broad. You know, it could be with existing organizations. It could be with individuals. Thinking once again, decentralized, we need to focus on strengths. I'll take a quick pause here and say one of the things that we committed to doing, I think that was year 2, and some of the folks I think are on the phone participating in that, we did leadership training with the project directors representing each of the counties. And the focus of that leadership training was focusing on your strengths-based leadership. And if anybody has an opportunity to go through such a training, it's really an enlightening experience. It's a little different than some of the other leadership training. I know the state care partnership has committed to the coach approach. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Wonderful. I benefited from some of that, for which I'm very grateful. Our theory was that we needed to focus on people's strengths. And I think nearly every time we get together as a group who took that training, we make a comment about what we learned about each other and about ourselves, and the need to focus on strengths rather than constantly building on ways to deal with your deficits, it's really best and most effective to build on your strengths. And that was part of what we invested in. We invested the same for the youth and family consultants. So here are a couple of pictures to entertain you, and then I'll stop jabbering and give you all a chance if you have any questions. So this is one of the youth conferences. Well, this was held at the Ramada and State College, designed by the youth, which is why it was absolutely critical that we put in some recreational activities. And you can see pictures of those there. They didn't want their, an assault on their brain all day long just to listen to lecture and such. They wanted to be able to be outside a little bit and do some networking. So that's how this was structured. You can see the part of the design group there is on the left-hand corner of your screen. So that was I think we're about 75 there. And here is a picture of the family conference there. You can see we brought in, I have my arrow, I don't know if you all can see it. So that's Dr. Judy Dogan was the primary speaker at that conference. This is a panel of families that talked with her. She also provided some lecture-based training, and I think that we had about the same at that training as well. So any questions up to that point? About 20 minutes in.
I've unmuted everybody in case there is any questions. We'll leave it open for just a minute or two, or maybe 30 seconds. If there's any questions, we'll be glad to take them. There was just a couple of key things that you said, Chris, I just thought were really endearing about the grant that you're doing is really the focus that you've really talked about is on the BHARP and the local growth and the local focus and the idea of you guys are farmers and planting a seed. I think it's just a great symbolism for looking at it from a larger piece to really that local piece. I think it's really great. And no offense in the leadership. I'm interested, who the leadership program that you were doing, who does that? And is that something that was created internally, or is it something that you?
No, no, and this will be a shock to all of you, but I got in a conversation with Lakeside Global Institute about this, and they said, you wouldn't believe this, we provide leadership training, and here's what we do, and here's all the research that says this is what's effective, is strength-based leadership. So we actually, Lakeside would provide that for you if you wanted to. They have you read, I'm going to forget the authors, Strength-Based Leadership, and there's another book they have that they provide as a part of it. And it's very introspective, again, focusing on your strengths. And I'm sure they would be glad. The CEO of Lakeside Global Institute and one of the individuals who provides the school-based training, neurologic training, is who provided it for us over, I believe it was 8 sessions we had. So yeah, again, the belief in their educational system, of course, is that, you don't just do sheep dip training, if you will. You do it over time so that you're able to explore and change behaviors and root more of what you learn. So it was really a fun summer. We did it 2 summers ago. It was really fun being together and learning about each other. And we did begin to make decisions for what it's worth. And even in our little group that gets together, we did begin to make decisions around using the people's strengths. Okay, this is something that the leader from Wayne County would be good at, or this is something the leader from Warren County would be good at, et cetera. I mean, you begin to think that direction, and it becomes a lot more fun. It really does.
If there's no other questions, I'll mute everybody and make sure to unmute Chris, and we'll continue.
Okay. So this graphic here, we did a poster presentation in Washington and used this graphic. I know, hopefully you all can see this. I know you're probably not going to read the fine print, but I wanted to just emphasize 2 things here about our trauma system transformation project. One is the counties chose the vendor. Early on, I believe in the fall, winter of 2015, we gathered information from what we believed at the time, based on what we learned, were 4 of the top training organizations around trauma system transformation that we knew about. The National Council for Behavioral Health, Lakeside Global Institute, who we ultimately chose, the Sanctuary Model, and NCTSN, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. We interviewed them extensively. We did a matrix on what their strengths and what they brought to the table and their approaches and the time commitments and the costs. We did an analysis of all of those. And then the 8 Tier 1 counties came together and said, we believe that Lakeside Global Institute's product is what could best suit our needs at this juncture and with what we have to offer. And for those of you, and I know there are some on the phone here who have participated in some of their trainings, you know, they're very good. And what they did that the other models didn't do, all 3 of the other models are excellent. We actually have a relationship with 1.5 of them we'll call now, because Dr. Bloom, who formerly was with Sanctuary, is actually attached to Lakeside now. And the National Council, we have Cheryl Sharp coming in from the National Council to do trauma training for the families coming up at the family conference. So, I mean, they all did a fine job. The tipping point for the counties was the commitment of time. That Lakeside, over time, you got training. You didn't have to sequester. You didn't have to spend days on end doing Lakeside training. 2.5-hour stints, you could really, you know, make headway and learn a lot. So they chose that. Pardon me. The reason, again, I have this graphic up here, and you probably can't see it, is that simultaneous to our development, we're talking about system transformation. The clinical providers of outpatient services in the 23 counties were charged with coming together around clinical models. And they chose 3 clinical models. So our thinking was, in working together as a BHARP system of 23 counties, was that the system of care funding and partners could be used and trained then ultimately to pardon me, make intelligent referrals, support their people in a more consistent way and with trauma-informed lenses, if you will, as they view the challenges that are presented, all in concert and in parallel with the clinical providers, that the system of care people then would have some place to refer people to that was trauma-informed. So this roadway, this pathway includes stops along the way, if you will, for the clinical training, for the system of care training, for the development of each of those models, for stops at the Trauma Institute. So every year that we've had a Trauma Institute, we invite everybody. We invite the clinical partners and the system of care partners. When I say system of care partners, think youth, family, system partners. When I say system of care partners, that includes the schools, the juvenile justice, child welfare, drug and alcohol, mental health, all of them come together every year for Trauma Institute. And I'll get to that here in a minute, how some illustrations about that. So through this pathway, we've come together at different intersections, if you will, to transform the system. They had their own learning collaborative, the clinical providers, the outpatient clinical providers, that was very structured, certainly a different approach than what we had. Pardon me. I just wanted to highlight that you see on this slide in the left-hand sort of quadrant, there's a system of care and our symbol, and in the right-hand quadrant is the BHARP Trauma Institute that they called it. So wanted to just highlight that for everyone. So some numbers, and these are a little bit old now, they're a couple months old, but so between October 15 and 17, about 1,683 training encounters. This is really tough to track because of the Lakeside training having segments, so and encounters. So there were a lot of encounters, and I got this from our in-kind tracking system, which tracks all of the training. So in 2018, of course, we were able to we were in full gear by that time and had 1,486 training hours just that year, training 524 unique individuals, and 4,911 hours of training provided, including the segments of which you see there numbered from Lakeside, as well as the Trauma Institute, as well as Compassion Fatigue, a separate training. Not enough time to go into all of that, but so, and you'll notice at the bottom, we talk about some additional training hours, again, all tracked through the in-kind system around Open Table, one of our sustainability strategies, cultural linguistic competency, county leadership teams, youth leadership, and family leadership, actually, and then cross-systems orientation at the counties. So put in parentheses that cross-system orientation. That was an initiative that several of the Tier 1 counties took on, where they would bring in their system stakeholders, human services, if you will. I'm kind of old in the system, so I would call the categorical programs in their systems together to orient around working together collaboratively. Another strategy for us was to ask Lakeside, challenge them. And we challenged them, and I think now we have some other folks around the state who are doing it as well, to provide, train the trainer around at least the basic trauma training. We'll call it Trauma 101 or 100 level trainings that would allow us access to that. And there's a fee that was associated with that, of course, to do the train the trainer. As they often said, this is kind of a peek behind Oz's curtain. The Wizard of Oz's curtain as to how they do things. And so our idea was that if the Kiwanis, the Rotary, a church, someone called, law enforcement, a hospital, we have a couple now that have gone into hospitals already, that could be responded to by local people. That parallel process of having the trainers being trained and have a level of expertise, but also demonstrate that level of expertise and be resources for their local communities is the system of care side benefit that you get from providing it yourself. So we trained families from the justice system. We trained behavioral health, child welfare, community care. Our managed care organization actually sent some folks to be trained as trainers, from folks from high fidelity wraparound, community action agencies. I guess probably drug and alcohol program folks. I'm trying to think because we ran another one of these recently. So now we'll have about 32 people trained. And if you know anything about Lakeside and their training approach, they always train in pairs. So these folks will be available to provide trauma training in pairs. So here's some examples from the Trauma Institutes. I don't have pictures organized yet from this year's, but in year one, we had Dr. Bloom come and introduce. She was just there for an hour. Actually was there virtually. We had about 68 people there the first year, in my recollection of that. The second year, we went for the gold. And if folks know Dr. Bruce Perry, I hope some of the folks on the phone here might have been able to be there. What an entertaining day that was. People were captivated. That day was a 2-day conference that included poster presentations by the clinical providers and system of care people, so we could begin to celebrate some of the successes. And then Dr. Perry was there for a full day with us, talking about brain science. We brought Dr. Bloom back last year to talk about sustainability and system transformation. She had the largest slide deck I've ever seen in my life. I don't know how many slides she had. I'm guessing about 1,500 slides. I mean, she had an enormous amount of information for us over 2 days. And this year, we had Dr. Scott Sells. And again, I don't know if some of you that are on the phone here were able to talk to Dr. Sells, but a little bit of theory behind why we had Dr. Sells. We learned a lot about brain science. We learned about system transformation. And in the end, when you took stock in this, by the end of year 3, we had a lot of people trained all over the map. Some people had basic training. Some people were clinically trained. Some people were somewhere in between with the Lakeside training. So we thought we would try and find a model that offered training that was manualized that people could use the next day. And Dr. Sells is a structural family therapist by trade, but developed a specific training around providing trauma-informed family therapy. And we had over 350 people sign up. We had 322 people, I just heard yesterday, was our final attendance at this year's Trauma Institute, and that was just held at the end of June. And what Dr. Sells did, a really quick commercial about him, is he's a true structural family therapist using what's before him. His model is manualized, his engagement strategy is manualized, people ate it up, and at the break, one of the breaks early on, a family came up to him and said, do you think you might talk to us a little bit about how some of your strategies could help us? Remember, we trained, including peers and families at all of our training institutes. So a family came up and he ended up using them as an example throughout the remainder of the training to illustrate the model, which just became an enormously rich experience for the people that were in attendance. And of course, helped that family all in real time. I don't know how the man did it, but he pulled it off. And we got mostly really good comments. So it was too intense for some people, but by and large, people really appreciated him applying he teach the concept, apply the concept to the family, and they were so very cooperative, and we're very indebted to them for sharing their family with us. Another concern of ours was that as people were going through the training, they'd forget. They'd think they weren't part of a bigger mission here. So we paid Lakeside every month to create a trauma tip. It's a commentary about a contemporary topic, strategy, national issue. And so I just thought I would highlight that. That's part of what we would consider to be sustainability. Open Table, talked to you about that a little while ago. That is the faith-government partnership, and I know some of you on the phone are exposed to that already. SAMHSA sanctions this, and we certainly supported it. We have a few tables going now, I think about 7 or 8 tables, working in our little areas. There's just 3 of the counties signed up to be, if you will, the guinea pigs for this. But we are now talking with Open Table as a part of a larger experience on creating communities. And I know some of you on the phone have had similar conversations around the parallel process of bringing faith and government together for not just this as a project, but as a working resource together. And so that's one of the things that attracted us to Open Table. Handle with Care was we heard about this on one of the SAMHSA technical assistance calls. In short, this is a system by which law enforcement can notify particularly schools and some other social service organizations, if they're tied to it, if an individual has a young person, a child actually, has been exposed to trauma in an evening, then there's a very short text-based system that allows the law enforcement to notify individuals who would encounter this child the next day. Pretty much, and of course there's a lot of training that goes on in the background of all that, so that the school, for example, doesn't immediately move to disciplining the child should they be sleeping in class, unprepared, homework not done, and not attentive and ready to learn that day, as opposed to looking like a discipline problem. It's looking more like this child, from a different lens, this child experienced trauma the night before, parents, domestic violence, drug issue, et cetera, that involved law enforcement, and that would allow the child some leeway, as opposed to, again, moving to looking at it as discipline. So this is our website. We have a separate BHARP System of Care website, which we now have someone in the past 6 to 8 months that's doing a bang-up job keeping up with a lot of the resources. So this is Monica and Sam. This is what I was thinking once you got to this point, you might want to comment. So these are the outcomes dashboards that we have access to. And so What does the data say? I'll read it, and I'd love to hear your comments from Monica and Sam on this. You do a much better job at this than I do. So the longitudinal dashboards use SAMHSA criteria to determine the positive, or the green, and negative, which is the red. And as you can see, thankfully, our outcomes look better. Youth and families are getting better. They're perceiving that they're getting better. This is real data from our longitudinal outcomes. This N is 121 on this particular dashboard, so here's another one that comments that you can see that things have improved. This is BHARP grant has seen its average overall health score positively increase from 2 to 3. So we were below, and it has actually reached an acceptable. Go ahead. I hear Monica on, or Sam.
Hi, this is Monica. Yeah, I think those are the two biggest areas, although we saw lots of positive outcomes across many different factors. But in that functional, sort of daily functioning, that getting along with people, doing well in school, generally satisfied with life, able to cope, that kind of data collection, that was just a really remarkable outcome, an increase of 25% and ending with over 70% of the population, doing well in that area. I think that, as well as the overall health, which includes sort of their sense of health, like emotional, physical, health and behavioral health, mental health, all of that kind of all together. I just felt like, the focus on trauma across all of their different services really contributed to those kinds of outcomes being able to be achieved. So, and I think they're even higher now at the end of having a larger sample. This is from a few months ago. So we saw that trend consistently, and I just think it's great.
Yeah. Thank you, Monica.
Mm-hmm.
This is another interesting thing, and I would love if we had, depending on the audience here, who might be on at higher level decision-making levels. So the national evaluation dashboards noticed how youth and caregivers perceive progress differently. In the case, a higher percentage of green indicates greater behavior. So here in this one, and then I want to make more of a comment relative to these dashboards on the next slide. You can see that youth and caregivers saw improvement, but caregivers still reported higher behavior problems than the youth did. So the youth basically thought they were getting better than what their caregivers thought that they were getting better. This is one we've cited several times, and it still strikes me. So, and it's a real indicator. And in talking with other folks who observe this, not with data, but observe this, totally agree that there's a difference between males and females in terms, and we're talking about youth now and children, in terms of their perception of services. So in a case, higher percentage of green indicates more overall impairment. Females actually had improvement, and then after 12 months, they started to tail off. Males continued to improve to some degree. Females tended to tail off. So does that indicate for our system, and this is the kind of stuff I used to share on those weekly updates, was, to be thinking is, do we need to anticipate that? If we have data that tells us this, do we need to anticipate that at about 9 or 10 months into services that females have been participating in over that period of time, we should be putting potentially, I'm suggesting, that we put in some sort of team meeting, regroup, rediscussion about where they'd like to go with services before they start to perceive that services are no longer helpful and they're really not getting any better. I mean, the data indicates that we should really be considering that. And as I say, when I talk to our friends at community care, when I've talked to folks that run interagency team meetings, they're like, yep, that happens. We can see that. I say, well, we have data to back that up. So in our system, is there a reason that we should be doing that? And I would say yes. Putting in some kind of interagency meeting with the family, somehow acknowledging that we need to reassess services before they start to tail off. So lessons learned. We're all coming down the home stretch. So lessons learned. We did another word cloud on this. So the overwhelming important part is relationship. Try to build relationship around any and every opportunity. If it's between the systems and the programs, if it's between families and youth and the systems, where we saw relationship is where we saw success. If relationships were not in place, they needed to be built before we were able to realize success in the counties. And again, I think I've almost met my quota about 4 or 5 times. I like to say this. I'm not talking at the BHARP level. I'm talking about it at the local level, where relationship was with United Way or was developed with the United Way. Guess who's funding trauma training now? The United Way, aside from system of care funding. Where there was a relationship with school districts, guess who's funding trauma training independent of system of care funding now? That'd be school districts. Using Lakeside, they're now contacting Lakeside through system of care with the connection, and the school districts are now, several of them are funding Lakeside's trauma training, as an example. All right, so this looks like it's cut off. I'm sorry. So a couple words about sustainability and the future, and then I think I'm about finished. And we'll have plenty of time to talk if you'd like. So BHARP applied for a continuation grant to begin August 31, 2019. This grant, these grant awards are not yet announced, and of course we're all anxious for that, for those of you that might be in the same situation as we're in with our grant ending September 29th, 2019. Our next grant would have started at the end of August, here in just about 1 month, but we have not heard yet either way. And in speaking with SAMHSA this morning, they know, nothing, they are in the stages of choosing, but nothing has been announced yet. We also applied for a no-cost extension. Because of the one-to-one match, and that match being dependent on what the counties generate typically, we had a fair amount of money left over. Our intent this last 18 months of the grant was to really engage school districts in providing training. That was kind of a missing link, and we all know that work in the system, they are so busy, oftentimes really hard to get their attention, and they are yet expected to be social workers and see these children and youth far more intensely than what our system sees them typically, except if you're in a partial or inpatient setting. And we all know this. So we're trying to get them to and support them. And that's really working, but they'll say to us, well, our in-services are planned like 12 to 18 months out. I'm like, well, we're gonna be done by that time. So our no-cost extension really focuses on finishing the trauma training, particularly in the schools, and continuing to use the parallel process and bringing the system partners along with those schools together to receive that training. And as I did mention, we actually have some tier 2 counties who don't get the $50,000 funding that have engaged their school districts because they got Trauma 101 or experienced it somewhere, using Lakeside to do the neurologic, which is their model of education system training. So we're pleased about that. So, and the intent of the grant was to continue to empower BHARP member counties to sustain their efforts locally. So as a result, as I just mentioned, school districts are now funding Lakeside, mostly neurologic. Tier 2 counties are funding trauma training, as I also mentioned, and counties are contracting with families and youth for consultation directly, not having BHARP be like the mega purchaser and then disseminating the money. That's kind of been an intentional process, if you will, part of our grant experiment in really intentionally moving away from being that mega purchaser of the training and of resources. I think that might be it. Now, I'm happy if I can answer any questions, or maybe I can't answer questions, I'm most happy to have a discussion if there's anything I could share.
I'll let people have the option of unmuting as they feel need to and ask any questions. I think, Trista, I think for me, there was just a couple of key things that I think that I think are really helpful, and maybe there's even some words of wisdom in some of this. I think one of the big things you talked about was the idea of relationships and relationships with those in who you're working with. How did you work on some of the relationships with the providers that were part of the evaluation? Did you run into any barriers or challenges or ways that to help them understand why the evaluation is important, or thoughts or processes that you were able to think of to do?
Well, let me just say before Monica, as Monica picks herself up off the floor, it was a challenge. Again, we really depended so much on the county having relationship with the folks that were participating in the evaluation. And I will say, again, part of our grand experiment is we didn't dictate a lot of that. The understanding was we were doing trauma system transformation, if you will, and I didn't use this little catchphrase, but I've been saying in all of the touch points in the system. So some of the evaluation was done in outpatient settings, some of it was done in child welfare, some of it was done in the mental health case management units, targeted case management units. We didn't dictate any of that. And that made for some very anxious times, I'll tell you. As I say, we made our quota. It made for some very anxious times, as you know, we didn't have a specific target group that we had already engaged. So we really strongly depended on the county project directors and their systems to find the individuals to interview.
Thank you. I think the other thing related to the relationship was also it's fantastic that from what I guess I'm gleaning or maybe making a jump or a leap towards is that with the school districts in the United Way that are now providing some of the trauma funding, my assumption would be that they received some kind of funding or trauma training there in the beginning, and they saw the value in it, and are now
exactly one. Exactly correct. We intentionally went after them. At Bruce Perry's training, I literally grabbed a hold of the arm of the United Way person from one of the local communities and put them with, because Lakeside was in attendance with Bruce Perry. They're very much into brain science. And when they told them we were bringing him in, they came in mass. And they brought their United Way. And I'm like, you people need to meet, because the Philadelphia area, southeastern PA, New Jersey United Way had already started funding this. So, and I intentionally went after some of those United Ways in these local communities to come and bring them in to that larger, exposure and that larger training. And that's exactly what happened. It was about building that relationship with people that they had something in common with. I should mention, and I usually mention this too, and I'm sorry I probably went so very fast. One of the other things we insisted about doing the trauma training with Lakeside was that when the counties, and it was really the only other criteria, was that the counties mixed the groups. I know some of you on the phone tried to train units. We insisted that they not train units. Again, part of the grand experiment. That we wanted juvenile justice to be in with mental health crisis workers, to be in with child welfare, to begin with BHRS providers, to be in with psychologists, to be in with domestic violence, shelter workers. And I just named off everybody that was in my Lakeside training, my first level Lakeside training. There were representatives from all those people in that training. And so when we were talking about vignettes and situations, people had a lot of aha moments about, wow, I didn't realize that crisis had all that to do. I didn't realize that, it's a juvenile justice had that mandate. Things started to gel between those groups as a result.
Yeah, and I think, and I can echo that comment from our experience, that having those multiple systems together, it is, as you put it in the one big word on the slide, is it starts to build those relationships. I think it's really helpful to understand and see where each other's coming from, and start to further that relationship. So great idea.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other thoughts or comments or questions? Chris, I'm also glad to see that you're continuing on with the parent and youth perspectives on their recovery and how they're getting better. I know that was one of the things that SAMHSA had pulled back on, at least for some of the grants in the past year. And I think it really is good information. So it's something our grant is continuing on as well, since we already have the evaluators out there to ask most of the questions. Spending a couple more minutes to get all that extra information absolutely is worthwhile.
I'll put a plug in the end, Mark, and I thank you for that. I'll put a quick plug for the Youth and Family Conferences. We're filling up. I'm kind of surprised. Heard this morning that we have a fairly good turnout for the Youth Conference, which is August the 7th, and I'm going to mess up the date for the Family Conference. I'm sorry. If you want to look on the website for that or on our Facebook page, you can see the save the date is still there. We're trying to close one conference before we open the registration for another conference. So that'll happen like August the 8th. We'll begin opening registration, I believe, for the Family Conference. So put a plug in for those two conferences, which are coming up. We certainly hope that if we get grant funding to continue for another 4-year grant cycle, that we'll continue those conferences because they're really starting to gain some traction, over the past couple of years. So anybody else have anything for me?
We have one request, and it's something that we can share out because everyone did register for this. Maureen Hawk had requested if there was a way to get some information about the Handle with Care system between law enforcement and schools. I know that from our grant, we have one of our a couple of our counties that are either interested or starting to do that. But yeah, absolutely, any information, Chris, if you have it, we can share that out as well.
That comes from West Virginia. And just a really quick bite about that, we have a couple minutes. They'll come and do the training for free. You just need to pay their expenses. It's a governmental agency that will do your technical assistance and training. Schuylkill County did it they were the pioneers. And I think they're trying to still get traction. It gets dicey because if you listen to what I said, and it's hard, law enforcement is really antsy about sharing kids' names. That's where it started to lose a little bit of traction. I think they're still working on it, but they get, and we even had some of their, like the district attorney was there for that opening training with that group, and they're still a little bit antsy. But if you look it up, Handle with Care out of West Virginia, out of the probation office. I'll send that to you, Mark, when I'll find that information.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we will have this webinar, and actually we have to get the other one up as well from last month, a little behind. We'll have these posted on our website under the PACARE partnership. So it's PACAREpartnership.org. And if you kind of doing the search under collaborative, you'll find it there, or it's also under our training tab and under systems. So we will have this up there. We also have some of our other presentations there as well. So from myself and the PACARE partnership, I want to thank you all for attending. It was really informative, Chris, and it's great to see all the work that you and your team have done. I think you're showing some real great successes here. Best of luck with the grant.
Thanks.
All right. So with that, I will say adieu to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.